They whipped her in front of the church until the rancher said, "Touch her again and we fight." The church bell tolled. The dust swirled and the crowd gathered to watch a woman shamed in the open street. She wasn't a criminal, she was a widow, accused only of using herbs to heal a sick child. The whip was raised high until a rancher stepped forward, throwing down his hat, and his warning froze every hand in the crowd. But this was no ordinary act of mercy. Behind the whispers and the hatred lay something bigger: land, water, and a secret deed that powerful men would do anything to steal. And once the truth came out, no home, no family, and no life would be safe. Now the town must choose fear or faith, violence or mercy. Can one man stand, protect her from the lash and from the ruthless cattle baron who wants her destroyed? Or will defending her cost him everything? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The church bells rang clear and bright across the Colorado settlement that Sunday morning, calling the faithful to worship. Rosa Alvarez walked quietly toward the white-painted church, her herb basket tucked close against her shawl. The morning sun caught the silver threads in her dark hair as she moved through the gathering crowd, her steps measured and dignified despite the sideways glances that followed her path. Just the night before, she had sat beside little Sarah Miller's bed, pressing cool claws to the child's burning forehead and administering carefully measured doses of willow bark tea. The fever had broken before dawn, and Sarah's grateful whimpers had been thanks enough for Rosa. She'd left extra herbs with clear instructions for the mother, shouldering her worn basket in the pre-dawn darkness. Now, as she approached the church steps, the whispers started like a prairie wind through dry grass. "Witch," someone hissed, using her heathen ways on Christian children. Rosa's fingers tightened on her basket, but she kept her chin high. She had heard such whispers before, had weathered worse storms than this. The herbs were God's gifts. She knew, meant to heal his children regardless of their origins. But this morning was different. Before she could reach the church door, several of the town elders stepped forward. Their faces were hard as winter granite, their eyes cold with righteousness. Deacon Matthews, his silver watch chain glinting in the morning sun, pointed an accusing finger. "We've tolerated your presence long enough, woman, but practicing witchcraft on our children crosses a line." Rosa took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No, Senator, you don't understand. I only used healing herbs." "Grab her," someone shouted. Rough hands seized her arms. Her basket clattered to the ground, precious herbs scattering in the dust. Children began to cry as she was dragged toward the church doors, her feet scraping against the wooden steps. Rosa didn't struggle. Dignity had been her shield through too many hardships to abandon it now, but fear coursed through her veins like ice water. Reverend Porter emerged from the church, his black coat severe against the morning sky. He looked down at Rosa, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "The Lord's house must be protected from such darkness," he intoned, raising his hand in a mockery of blessing. "Let her punishment serve as a warning to others who would bring pagan practices into our Christian community." A whip materialized, its leather length uncoiling like a snake in the morning light. Rosa felt her knees go weak, but she locked them, refusing to collapse. She would face whatever came with the same strength that had carried her through the loss of her husband, through the years of struggling alone on that others coveted. The crowd's anticipatory murmur was cut short by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Harold Boone rode into view, dust from the cattle trail still coating his clothes. He took in the scene with one sweep of his war-trained eyes. Rosa held between two men, the raised whip, the scattered herbs in the dirt. The big rancher swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, his face already ruddy from the morning sun, darkened with fury as he strode through the parting crowd. Without ceremony, he snatched off his hat and threw it to the ground, the gesture sharp with controlled violence. "Touch her again," he bellowed, his voice carrying the command of battlefield experience, "and we fight." The words crashed into the morning silence like summer thunder. The man holding the whip froze, his arms suspended in midair as if struck by lightning. Rosa felt the hands gripping her arms loosen slightly as Harold stepped between her and the would-be punisher, his broad shoulders a wall of protection. "Mr. Boone," Reverend Porter said, his voice stiff with affronted authority, This woman has been practicing witchcraft. She saved Sarah Miller's life last night, Harold cut in, his words sharp as a knife. I saw the child myself this morning, pink-cheeked and playing, when yesterday she was burning up with fever. That ain't witchcraft. That's God's own mercy working through honest knowledge. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, boots scuffing in the dust. Many had known Harold since he'd returned from the war, had seen him build his ranch from nothing through sheer determination and honest work. His word carried weight, and his willingness to stand against the crowd carried even more. The Miller girl did recover mighty quick, someone muttered from the crowd. My own grandmother used willow bark for fevers, another voice added hesitantly. Harold's eyes swept the gathering, meeting gazes until they dropped. I reckon we all got some thinking to do about what's really Christian behavior, he said, his voice pitched to carry. Seems to me dragging a widow to be whipped for helping a sick child ain't exactly what the good book teaches about loving thy neighbor. Rosa stood very still, her shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. She could feel the tension in the air shifting, like weather changing before a storm. The hands holding her arms fell away completely, their owner stepping back as if distance might absolve them of their earlier actions. This woman has done nothing but good since she came to this settlement, Harold continued, his voice gentler now but no less firm. She's tended your sick, shared her knowledge freely, asked nothing in return but to be left in peace on her own land. If that's witchcraft, then maybe we need more of it, not less. The whip lowered slowly, its wielder looking uncertain now. Reverend Porter's face worked through several expressions before settling into a careful neutral mask. Perhaps, he said carefully, we have been hasty in our judgment. Perhaps, Harold agreed, his tone making it clear this was the only acceptable conclusion. He turned to Rosa then, his expression softening as he met her eyes. Ma'am, he said, bending to gather her scattered herbs, allow me to help you with these. Rosa found her voice at last, though it trembled slightly. Gracias, Senor Boone, she whispered, accepting the basket he offered. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and she felt the strength in them, the gentleness with which he handled her precious herbs. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Some looked ashamed, others defiant, but none dared meet Harold's steady gaze as they filed into the church. Rosa stood for a moment, uncertain whether to follow or retreat to her small homestead. Harold solved her dilemma by offering his arm, as properly as any gentleman at a social gathering. I believe we both came here to worship, he said quietly. Shall we? Rosa hesitated only a moment before placing her hand on his arm. Together, they climbed the church steps, their boots echoing on the wooden boards. The morning sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in soft gold. As they entered the house of God not as outcast and protector, but as equals in his sight, Harold's weathered boots creaked on the wooden church steps as he faced the gathering of elders. The morning sun cast long shadows behind them, but he stood firm, his jaw set with quiet determination. You men forget too easy, he said, his voice carrying across the tense silence. 2 winters ago, when my niece Sarah lay burning with fever, no doctor within 50 miles. He paused, letting the memory sink in. Rosa here rode through a blizzard with her medicines. Saved that child's life while you all stood wringing your hands and saying prayers. Deacon Matthews shifted uncomfortably, his silver watch chain catching the light. That was different, Boone. We didn't know then that she was using what? Harold cut in, his tone sharp as a knife edge. The same herbs the good Lord put on this earth? The same knowledge any frontier woman worth her salt carries? His eyes swept the crowd, meeting each gaze until they dropped. Seems to me we're mighty quick to call something witchcraft when it comes from hands we don't approve of. Rosa stood quietly behind him, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her dark eyes watched the crowd, reading the shifting moods. Like weather signs. Some faces softened with memory or shame, while others remained hard as stone. Reverend Porter stepped forward, his black coat catching the morning breeze. Mr. Boone, your reputation in this community affords you some latitude, but defending a heathen. Careful, Reverend, Harold warned softly. That heathen knows more scripture than most who warm your pews, and she shows more Christian charity than I've seen here today. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several townspeople glanced down at their Sunday boots, unable to meet Harold's steady gaze. Martha Wilson, whose youngest had been saved by Rosa's remedies just last month, touched her husband's arm and whispered something that made him step back from the group. Rosa trembled slightly, though whether from fear or the morning chill, Harold couldn't tell. He'd seen that look before, the uncertainty of someone caught between threat and sanctuary, unsure which would prove more dangerous in the end. "Come on," he said quietly, turning to her. "My wagon's just yonder. You'll be safe at my ranch until this blows over." As he guided her through the dispersing crowd, Harold felt the weight of stares on his back. Most folks moved aside, some nodding slightly, others frowning but unwilling to challenge him directly. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the last of the dawn mist as they reached his wagon. Movement caught Harold's eye. On the hill overlooking the church, Ezra Haskins sat astride his black stallion, watching the scene unfold. The cattle baron's thin smile sent a chill down Harold's spine despite the warming day. Haskins had been pushing to buy Rosa's land for months, claiming the spring on her property for his growing herds. This morning's events would give him new ammunition. Harold helped Rosa into the wagon, noting how she kept her dignity despite trembling hands. He gathered the reins and clicked to his horses, leaving the church and its judgment behind. The wagon wheels cut fresh tracks in the dirt road as they headed toward his ranch. The morning sun at their backs, the kitchen of Harold's ranch house glowed warm and welcoming that evening. Lamplight danced on the whitewashed walls, and the smell of coffee mixed with wood smoke from the stove. His niece and nephew, Sarah and Tommy, peered around the doorframe at Rosa, their young faces bright with curiosity. "Is it true you can talk to plants, ma'am?" Tommy whispered, edging closer. "Billy Watson says you know their secret names." "Tommy," Harold warned gently, but Rosa's smile stopped him. "Plants don't need secret names, Piquego," she said softly. "They speak through their colors, their scents, the way they grow. God gives each one its own voice if we learn to listen." Sarah, bolder now, stepped fully into the kitchen. "Like the tea you made me when I was sick?" It tasted like sunshine. Rosa's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "See, Nina?" Just like that. Harold watched the exchange while he poured coffee into tin cups, his heart warming at how naturally the children took to Rosa. But worry nagged at him like an old wound before rain. This decision would bring trouble. He could feel it as surely as he'd once sensed ambushes in Virginia. "Uncle Harold?" Sarah tugged at his sleeve. "Can Miss Rosa teach me about the plants, please?" He ruffled her hair, buying time to choose his words carefully. "We'll see, sugar. Right now, Miss Rosa needs rest. It's been a long day." The children reluctantly said their goodnights, leaving Harold and Rosa alone in the lamp-lit kitchen. She cradled her coffee cup, staring into its depths as if reading the future there. "Gracias, Señor Boone," she said at last. "Your kindness today, I have no words." "Harold," he corrected gently. And kindness had nothing to do with it. What they aimed to do wasn't right. Rosa looked up, her dark eyes serious. "They will not stop with this morning, Harold. The town center Haskins, they have wanted my land. Since Miguel died, now they will say I have bewitched you too." Harold's hand tightened on his coffee cup. "Let them talk. I've weathered worse storms than gossip. This storm may destroy us both," she warned softly. The lamp flickered, casting moving shadows on the wall. Outside, a coyote called lonely into the gathering night. Harold thought of Ezra Haskins's knowing smile, of the whispers that would already be spreading through town. But when he looked at Rosa's quiet strength, her gentle way with his sister's children, he knew he'd made the right choice. "Then we'll weather it together," he said simply, and poured them both more coffee as the evening deepened around the ranch house. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's wooden shutters, painting golden stripes across the warm kitchen table. The aroma of fresh cornbread mingled with the rich scent of coffee, making the humble breakfast feel like a feast. Sarah and Tommy sat at the table, their eyes bright with curiosity as they watched Rosa butter a piece of still warm cornbread. "Did you learn about plants from your mama?" Sarah asked, picking at her own slice. Rosa's hands paused briefly, a gentle smile touching her lips. "See, from my mother and her mother before her. The Apache people know many secrets of the land." Tommy leaned forward, elbows on the table until Harold's quiet cough reminded him of his manners. Can you teach us which plants are good to eat? Billy Watson says some berries can kill you dead. Tommy, Harold warned from his place by the stove, but Rosa shook her head. No, it is good, he asks. Knowledge keeps children safe. She turned to Tommy. You are right, Piquego. Some plants heal, others harm. This is why we must learn with respect. Sarah's face lit up. Like the purple flowers you used in my tea? Exactament. Those flowers, we call them echinacea. They help fight fever. Rosa's voice carried the warmth of shared wisdom, and Harold noticed how naturally she spoke with the children. Neither talking down to them nor overwhelming them with information. After breakfast, Harold watched through the kitchen window as his niece and nephew helped Rosa clear the breakfast dishes, their earlier shyness melting away like morning frost. The sight stirred something in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt since his sister passed, leaving him to raise her children. The morning chores went quickly with extra hands. Harold smiled as he heard Rosa teaching the children Spanish words while they fed the chickens. Her voice carried across the yard, patient and kind, making even simple tasks feel like adventures. El Maíz, she would say, and they would repeat after her, giggling at their attempts to roll the "r" properly. As the sun climbed higher, Harold saddled his horse to check the fence lines. The spring air carried the scent of sage and prairie grass, and his mount's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust as they rode along the boundaries of his land. His thoughts kept drifting back to the ranch house, to Rosa and the children working in the kitchen garden. The afternoon passed in a rhythm of work and quiet companionship. Rosa showed the children how to tell which plants needed water, her hands gentle as she guided theirs to feel the soil. Harold caught glimpses of their activities as he moved between tasks, mending tack, checking on new calves, and repairing a loose board on the barn door. When evening settled over the ranch, they gathered again in the kitchen. The remains of a simple supper: beans, more cornbread, and fresh greens from the garden sat on the table. Lamplight cast a warm glow over their faces as Rosa reached into the folds of her skirt and withdrew a carefully wrapped bundle. The cloth fell away to reveal a document, its territorial seal still clear despite the paper's worn edges. Harold leaned forward, his coffee forgotten as Rosa smoothed the deed on the table between them. Miguel, my husband, she began, her voice soft but steady. He worked 3 years to buy this land. The spring that runs through it, it is sweet. Water, pure and cold even in summer. Her fingers traced the property lines drawn on the attached map. It borders your ranch to the south, Senator Harold. Harold studied the document, noting the official stamps and signatures. Good water's worth more than gold out here, he said quietly. Rosa's hands clasped together tightly. Senator Haskins, he came first with offers, then with threats. She looked up, meeting Harold's gaze. Yesterday at the church, it was not the first time he tried to shame me, to make the town turn against La Bruja, the witch woman. The pieces fell into place in Harold's mind like a complicated puzzle finally revealed. He wants control of the water rights, he said, his jaw tightening. Force you out, buy the land cheap. See, Rosa's voice wavered slightly. Miguel died protecting this land. 3 men came in the night, saying they were lost. They shot him when he went to help. She squared her shoulders. I will not dishonor his memory by surrendering to bullies. Harold pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. The magnitude of what he'd stepped into yesterday morning hit him full force. Defending Rosa meant standing against Ezra Haskins, the richest man in the territory, a man who could buy judges and hire guns with equal ease. I know what you risk by helping me, Rosa said softly. Perhaps it would be better if I... No, Harold cut her off, his voice firm but gentle. What's right doesn't change just because it's difficult. He met her eyes across the table. You won't face this alone. Alone. The lamp flickered, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, coyotes began their evening chorus, their wild voices echoing across the prairie. Harold had always thought of their calls as nature's way of marking territory, of saying, "We are here, we are watching." Tonight, they seemed both a warning and a reminder the land held secrets, and some men would do anything to possess them. Rosa carefully rewrapped the deed, her movements deliberate and precise. Gracias, she whispered, but Harold saw in her eyes that she understood the true weight of his promise. This wasn't just about one widow's property anymore. It was about justice, about standing against the kind of men who would use fear and force to take what wasn't theirs. The coyotes called again. Closer now, their yips and howls weaving through the gathering darkness. Harold poured them both fresh coffee, and they sat in companionable silence, listening to the wild song of the prairie night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, the warmth of the kitchen and the strength of shared purpose was enough. The afternoon sun beat down on the ranch, drawing sweat from Harold and his men as they worked to repair the corrals. The sharp ring of hammers striking nails echoed across the yard, mixing with the low voices of the ranch hands as they steadied wooden posts and checked measurements. Harold paused to wipe his brow, glancing toward the house where Rosa supervised Sarah and Tommy at their lessons. Through the open window, he could hear their young voices reciting multiplication tables, punctuated by Rosa's gentle encouragement. The domestic scene brought an unexpected warmth to his chest, despite the weight of knowing trouble was brewing. Thunder of approaching hooves broke the peaceful rhythm of the afternoon. Harold straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle that leaned against the corral post. 5 riders approached in a cloud of dust, their horses' hooves kicking. Up golden swirls in the late afternoon light, Harold recognized the lead rider immediately. Ezra Haskins sat tall in his expensive saddle, his black coat unmarked by dust despite the long ride. 4 men flanked him, each wearing gun belts and hard expressions that spoke of violence for hire rather than honest ranch work. The ranch hands stopped their work, hammerheads falling silent as tension crackled through the air. Rosa appeared in the doorway of the house, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She quickly ushered the children inside, closing the door behind them. Ezra reined his horse to a stop, dust settling around the animal's legs. His eyes, cold as Winter Creek water, fixed on Harold with calculated disdain. The cattle baron swung down from his saddle with practiced ease, his boots raising small puffs of dirt as he landed. "Boone," Ezra drawled, his voice carrying a cross. "The yard. Seems you've taken up charity work." His gaze slid to Rosa, who stood straight-backed on the porch, her face composed despite the fear Harold could see in her eyes. "My home's my business, Haskins," Harold replied evenly, not moving from his position by the corral. His ranch hands spread out slightly, their movements casual but purposeful as they kept their eyes on Ezra's armed men. Ezra's lip curled in a sneer. "Your business became my business when you decided to harbor a squatter laying claim to water. Rights that should be mine." He took a step forward, his spurs jingling softly. "You're a smart man, Boone, or at least I thought you were. Surely you can see how this ends." "I see a man trying to steal what isn't his," Harold said, his voice cold and clear in the tense afternoon air. Ezra's face darkened. "That spring water could double my herd size. I won't let some Mexican witch and a foolish rancher stand in this way of progress." He turned his attention to Rosa. "Hand over the deed, woman. Save yourself and your protector here a world of trouble." Rosa's fingers tightened on her shawl, but her voice remained steady. "The land is mine, Senator Haskins. My husband paid for it with honest work and his life." "Your husband was a fool who didn't know his place," Ezra spat. Behind him, his men shifted in their saddles, hands resting meaningfully on their holstered revolvers. Harold's fingers tightened on his rifle, though he didn't raise it. The weapon's solid weight grounded him as he spoke, each word measured and hard as stone. "You'll not steal water through fear, Haskins. Not today. Not ever." For a long moment, the only sound was the soft snort of horses and the whisper of wind through prairie grass. Ezra's face worked through several emotions before settling into a cold smile that never reached his eyes. He turned and mounted his horse with deliberate slowness. "Then you've chosen war, Boone," he said, gathering his reins. "Remember that when everything you've built turns to dust." He touched his hat brim in a mocking salute. "Ma'am." The riders wheeled their horses, hooves thundering against the packed earth as they galloped away. The dust of their departure hung in the air like a threat made visible. Harold waited until they were well away before lowering his rifle. He turned to his ranch hands. "Double the watch tonight. Any man who wants to ride out, I'll understand. This isn't your fight." The men exchanged glances before Big John, the oldest hand, spoke up. "Reckon it is now, boss. Ain't none of us much fond of bullies." As the men returned to work with renewed purpose, Harold noticed Rosa was no longer on the porch. He found her in the barn, standing in the shadows near his old mare's stall. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I bring only trouble," she whispered as he approached. "My presence here will destroy everything you have built." "The children are safer with you here than anywhere else," Harold interrupted gently. He leaned against the stall door, giving her space while staying close. "What Haskins does isn't your fault. This land has always been worth fighting for, yours no less than mine." Rosa wiped her eyes with the edge of her shawl. "Miguel said something similar the night before." She trailed off, unable to finish. Harold understood the weight of unspoken words. They stood in companionable silence as afternoon light slanted through the barn's high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Finally, Rosa straightened her shoulders, gathering her dignity around her like armor. "The children should not miss their lessons," she said, her voice stronger. "And I have medicines to prepare. Dark times may come, and we must be ready." Harold nodded, respecting her resilience. They walked back to the house together, where Sarah and Tommy waited with worried faces pressed against the window glass. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity, securing livestock, checking weapons, preparing for whatever the night might bring. As darkness fell, Harold moved through the house, checking locks and loading extra cartridges. Through the windows he could see his men patrolling the boundaries of the ranch, their shapes moving like shadows against the star-filled sky. Rosa tucked the children into bed, her soft voice singing an old Spanish lullaby that drifted through the house like a prayer. Outside, beyond the circle of lamplight that spilled from the windows, darker shadows moved in the night. Harold stood at the kitchen window, coffee cup cooling in his hand, watching. The night wind carried the distant howl of coyotes, and somewhere in the darkness, a horse stamped restlessly. The deed lay wrapped in its cloth on the kitchen table, innocent-looking, despite the blood and greed it had already sparked. Harold knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they could only wait and watch as night settled over the land they had all chosen to defend. Days stretched into an uneasy rhythm at the Boone Ranch. The morning sun would rise over the distant mountains, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, finding Rosa already awake and moving through the kitchen. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh tortillas filled the house, drawing sleepy children from their beds and ranch hands to the back door, their tin cups held hopefully. Harold watched from his customary spot by the window as Rosa settled into ranch life with quiet grace. Her capable hands seemed to find endless ways to contribute, whether mending torn shirts or teaching Sarah how to pat out perfect circles of dough for biscuits. The initial wariness between her and the ranch hands melted away like morning frost under her gentle manner and ready smile. One afternoon, Big John came running to the house, his weathered face creased with worry. "Boss, that young heifer, the spotted one, she's down with fever." Rosa looked up from her mending, setting aside Tommy's patched trousers. "May I help?" she asked softly. "I know something of sick animals." Harold nodded, and they followed Big John to the barn. The spotted heifer lay in the straw, her sides heaving with labored breath. Rosa knelt beside the animal, running gentle hands over its flanks. After a careful examination, she hurried back to the house, returning with her medicine bundle. "Watch," she instructed, mixing herbs into a poultice. Her movements were sure and practiced as she applied the sweet-smelling mixture to the heifer's chest. "This will draw out the fever, but we must tend her through the night." Harold helped her set up a makeshift bed of blankets in the barn. As evening fell, they took turns watching over the sick animal. Rosa's soft humming filled the quiet spaces between the heifer's struggling breaths. By morning, the young cow was standing, wobbly but alive, and Big John's face split into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be," he said, scratching his head. "That's mighty. Fine doctoring, Miss Rosa." Word of the heifer's recovery spread among the ranch hands. They began seeking Rosa out for their own ailments, a sprained wrist, a persistent cough, a back pain that wouldn't ease. She treated them all with the same gentle attention she gave the children, never asking for payment but accepting their awkward offerings of thanks with dignity. Sarah and Tommy took to following Rosa like devoted shadows. They peppered her with questions about her medicines and begged to help gather herbs from the kitchen garden she had started. Harold's heart squeezed strangely the first time he heard Tommy call her Auntie Rosa while helping her hang laundry. The words slipped out natural as breathing, and Rosa's eyes had grown bright with unshed tears even as she smiled. One evening, after the supper dishes were cleared and the children sent to bed, Harold paused in the doorway of the front room. Rosa sat by the window, her mending forgotten in her lap as she gazed at the stars. Her voice lifted in a Spanish hymn, the familiar melody of Amazing Grace carrying clearly despite the foreign words. Without thinking, Harold joined in with the English verses he knew by heart. Rosa started slightly, then smiled, her voice blending with his in perfect harmony. The simple act of sharing song loosened something in Harold's chest that he hadn't realized was tight, but beyond the ranch's boundaries, tension continued to build. Harold heard from his hands about the talk in town, how some folks spat Rosa's name like a curse, while others defended her healing skills in whispered conversations. Women began appearing at the ranch in the early mornings or late evenings, looking over their shoulders as they knocked softly at the kitchen door. Rosa never turned them away. She listened to their troubles, mixed their medicines, and accepted their trade goods, eggs, flour, butter, bits of fabric with quiet dignity. They risk much to come, she told Harold one evening. I cannot refuse them comfort when they show such courage. The Sunday morning church service became a weekly trial. Harold insisted on attending with the children, refusing to let fear keep them away from worship. But he couldn't miss the way some women drew their skirts aside as they passed, or how certain men turned their backs. The whispered slurs reached his ears: Indian lover, witch's friend, traitor to his own kind. Yet there were others who met his eyes, who nodded slightly or touched their hats in greeting. Mrs. Peterson, whose baby Rosa had treated for colic, pressed a loaf of fresh bread into his hands after service. Old Mr. Jenkins, whose joints moved easier thanks to Rosa's salve, made a point of asking loudly after that fine lady's health. It was during one such Sunday that Reverend Samuel Carter approached Harold as the congregation dispersed. The young preacher's earnest face was troubled as he asked to call at the ranch that evening. Harold agreed, recognizing the weight of concern in the minister's eyes. The Reverend arrived just as Rosa was putting the children to bed. Harold met him on the porch, offering coffee, which Samuel accepted with a grateful nod. They sat in the gathering dusk, steam rising from their cups as crickets began their evening chorus. I'll speak plain, Mr. Boone, Samuel said finally. Ezra Haskins spent 2 hours with Judge Matthews yesterday. I saw his buggy outside the courthouse myself. Harold's fingers tightened on his cup. I reckon he's trying to work the law his way. Samuel nodded soberly. The judge owes him money. Everyone knows it, though none will say it aloud. And Ezra's been in church every Sunday, praying loud and long about protecting the community from harmful influences. The young preacher's mouth twisted with distaste. You're taking a risk warning me, Harold observed. Perhaps? Samuel set his empty cup aside. But I've been reading my Bible close lately. There's much in there about welcoming strangers, protecting widows, and standing against those who twist justice for their own gain. He stood, settling his hat carefully. Sometimes true justice must begin in one man's home. Mr. Boone, you've shown more Christian charity than most who warm the pews each Sunday. Harold walked the Reverend to his horse, watching until the young man disappeared into the gathering darkness. When he returned to the porch, he found Rosa waiting with a fresh pot of coffee. The Reverend is a good man, she said softly, refilling his cup. It cannot be easy for him, standing between his conscience and those who pay his salary. Harold nodded, thinking of Samuel's words. He hadn't expected allies in this fight, had been prepared to stand alone if necessary. But here was the young preacher, risking his position to warn them. And there were others, the women who came for healing, the ranch hands who stayed loyal, the neighbors who offered small kindnesses in defiance of Ezra's influence. The evening breeze carried the scent of Rosa's herb garden and the distant lowing of cattle. From inside came the children's voices, saying their prayers before sleep. The familiar sounds of home wrapped around him, all the dearer now for being threatened. Rosa's quiet presence beside him felt as natural as breathing. She hummed softly, the same hymn from earlier, and Harold found himself joining in once more. Their voices twined together in the gathering dark, a small defiance against those who would tear this fragile peace apart. Dawn painted the eastern sky in gentle brushstrokes. of pink and gold as Harold hitched the horses to his wagon. The morning air held a crisp bite, warning of the changing season. He adjusted the harnesses with practiced hands, checking each buckle twice. Today's journey held too much importance for careless mistakes. Rosa emerged from the house carrying a small bundle wrapped in faded cotton, the precious deed secure against her chest. She wore her best dress, dark blue calico pressed smooth, and her long black hair was neatly braided. Harold noticed her hands trembling slightly as she approached. "You don't have to come," he said softly. "I can present the papers myself." Rosa lifted her chin. This land was Miguel's dream, our dream. "I must face whatever comes." She clutched the bundle tighter. "But I am afraid, Harold. If the judge sides with Senator Haskins, then we'll find another way," Harold assured her, helping her up onto the wagon seat. "But that deed's legal and proper. Even Ezra can't change what's written in black and white." The children waved from the porch as Big John promised to keep watch over everything. Harold clucked to the horses, and they set off down the rutted trail toward town. The morning sun warmed their backs as the wagon rolled through stands of aspen, their leaves starting to turn golden. "Miguel loved this season," Rosa said after a while, her voice soft with memory. "He said the changing colors reminded him that God paints the world new each year." She smoothed the bundle in her lap. This spring, it meant everything to him. He said water brings life, and where there is life, there can be hope. Harold nodded, understanding. That's why Ezra wants it so bad. Man like that sees water as power, not hope. He adjusted the reins thoughtfully. "Your husband was right, though. Sometimes hope shows up in unexpected places." They discussed the risks as they traveled, going over what they would say to the judge. Rosa knew every detail of how Miguel had purchased the land, every signature and seal on the documents. Harold had witnessed enough legal proceedings during his army days to know procedure mattered as much as truth. The sun stood high when they finally rolled into town. Harold helped Rosa down from the wagon, noting how she straightened her shoulders and lifted her head. Whispers followed them down the boardwalk, some hostile, some merely curious. A few people nodded greeting, though most turned away. The courthouse stood at the end of Main Street, its wooden steps worn smooth by years of boots. Harold opened the heavy door for Rosa, following her into the cool dimness inside. The main room smelled of dust and old paper. Sunlight slanting through high windows. Ezra Haskins already waited there with his lyre, looking sleek and satisfied as a well-fed cat. His smile showed too many teeth when he spotted them. "Well now, if it ain't the widow woman and her champion. Come to face justice at last?" Harold's jaw tightened, but Rosa touched his arm lightly. Her quiet dignity made Ezra's mockery seem cheap and small. Judge Matthews entered from his chambers, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and an air of perpetual tiredness. He settled behind his desk, arranging papers with fussy precision. "I understand we're here about a water rights dispute." Ezra's lawyer stepped forward first, presenting their case in smooth, practiced words. He spoke of development and progress, of putting resources to proper use. He questioned whether a lone woman could properly manage such valuable water rights. When he finished, Rosa stepped forward. Her voice remained steady as she presented the deed, carefully unwrapping the protective cloth. "My husband purchased this land legally, Your Honor. The spring lies within our boundaries, as the survey shows. He paid fair price and recorded everything properly." The judge adjusted his spectacles, examining the documents with careful attention. Harold moved closer to Rosa, lending silent support. As they waited, the room felt still as a held breath. "Mr. Boone," the judge said finally, "you've known both parties here. What do you say to this matter?" Harold cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I served with Miguel Alvarez during the war. He was a good man who did everything proper and legal. That spring was his dream of building something lasting. His widow has every right to carry on that dream." He met the judge's eyes steadily. "And she's proved herself a blessing to this community, whether some folks want to admit it or not." Ezra surged to his feet. "This is absurd. You can't let some Mexican woman's scrap of paper stop progress. I have plans for that water, plans that'll benefit the whole territory. Mr. Haskins," the judge's voice cracked like a whip, "you will maintain proper decorum in this court." He held up Rosa's deed, These papers are entirely in order. The territorial seal and all signatures are legitimate. The survey marks are clear. He set the document down firmly. The law must respect proper ownership, regardless of the owner's gender or heritage. The spring and surrounding land legally belong to Mrs. Rosa Alvarez. This court affirms her full rights to that property. Rosa swayed slightly. Harold caught her elbow, steadying her as relief washed across her face. Ezra's fury filled the room like thunderclouds, but the judge's decision stood firm as mountain stone. "This isn't finished," Ezra snarled as they left the courthouse. "That water will be mine, one way or another." Harold stepped between them, his voice low and cold. "The law's spoken, Ezra. Don't make me show you why they called me sergeant during the war." The ride home felt lighter, despite Ezra's threats hanging over them. Rosa held the deed close, sometimes touching it as if to reassure herself it was real. The afternoon sun gilded the aspens as they rolled past, and Harold found himself humming an old cavalry tune. They arrived home to find Sarah and Tommy bouncing with excitement on the porch. The children had convinced Big John to help them make a celebration supper. The smell of rabbit stew filled the cabin, and fresh bread cooled on the kitchen table. "Mrs. Peterson brought the bread," Sarah explained proudly. She said it was a gift for good fortune. That evening, laughter rang through the cabin as they shared the meal. Tommy entertained them with his best coyote impression while Sarah solemnly served everyone's second helpings. Even Big John stayed to celebrate, his deep chuckle mixing with Rosa's soft laughter. Harold watched it all, joy mingling with caution in his heart. They had won this battle, but he knew Ezra Haskins well enough to know the war wasn't over. The cattle baron didn't take defeat easily, and he had too much pride to back down now. But for tonight, they celebrated victory. Rosa's eyes shone with happy tears as she served the bread, and the children's laughter rang sweet and clear. Whatever tomorrow might bring, this moment belonged to Hope. Morning painted the Colorado sky in brushstrokes of rose and gold. Rosa stepped out onto the cabin's wooden porch, a basket of fresh-washed laundry balanced on her hip. The air held that special crispness that comes after rain, making everything seem newer and brighter somehow. Sarah and Tommy darted around the yard, their laughter mixing with indignant squawks as they chased the chickens. Rosa smiled, remembering her own childhood games on mornings just like this. She began hanging sheets on the line, their white surfaces billowing like sails in the gentle breeze. "Auntie Rosa," Sarah called out, her braids flying. "Look what I found." She held up a blue jay feather, its color brilliant against her small palm. "Muy bonito," Rosa praised, then added in English, "Very pretty, mi pequeña." The girl beamed at learning the new words, tucking the feather carefully into her apron pocket. Meanwhile, Harold rode out with the sunrise, checking fence lines and cattle. The steady rhythm of his horse's hooves matched the lightness in his heart. Yesterday's victory at the courthouse had changed things. For the first time since losing his brother and sister-in-law, since taking on the children, since the long lonely years after the war, hope felt real again. He paused atop a ridge, surveying his land. Green pastures rolled away below him, cattle dotting the landscape like scattered pennies. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry carrying clear in the morning air. Harold touched the brim of his hat, offering a quiet word of thanks to the Almighty for this moment of peace. The sun tracked across the sky as Harold made his rounds. He mended a broken section of fence, checked on a pregnant heifer, and spoke, with his ranch hands about rotating the herd to fresh grazing. All the while, his thoughts kept drifting back to the cabin, to Rosa's quiet strength and the children's laughter. Dusk was painting the western sky purple when Harold finally turned toward home. He found Rosa at the well, struggling with 2 heavy buckets. Without a word, he dismounted to help, taking both handles in his weathered hands. "Gracias," she said softly, smoothing her skirt. "The children helped me gather vegetables for supper." They walked together to the cabin, their boots crunching on gravel. The sound of Tommy playing his tin whistle drifted through the open window, accompanied by Sarah's attempt to teach their dog new tricks. Inside, the kitchen glowed warm with lamplight and cooking smells. Rosa had made bean soup with cornbread, the hearty kind that stuck to your ribs. As they ate, conversation flowed easily between them all. "I was thinking," Rosa said, breaking off a piece of cornbread. "Perhaps we could expand the garden come spring. There's good soil near the oak tree, and I know some plants that would grow well there." Harold nodded, considering. "Might be nice to have more fresh vegetables. The children could help too." "See," Rosa smiled at Sarah and Tommy. "And I could teach them the Spanish names while we work." "Perhaps," she hesitated, then continued more softly, "perhaps they might like to learn some of our prayers as well?" In both languages, the children's eyes lit up at this idea. "Could we really?" Sarah asked eagerly. "Like the prayer you say before bed?" "If your uncle agrees," Rosa answered, glancing at Harold questioningly. Harold studied his coffee cup for a moment, then looked up with a gentle smile. "Reckon the good Lord hears prayers in any language. Might do us all some good to learn more ways to talk to him." After supper, they gathered in the sitting room. Harold sat in his old leather chair, Bible open on his knee, reading by the warm glow of the lamp. His deep voice filled the room with familiar words of comfort and promise. Rosa sat nearby in the rocker, her needle flashing as she mended one of Harold's work shirts. The children sprawled on the rug with their dog, content just to listen. Peaceful scene felt almost like a painting, Harold thought. Like something you might see hanging in a fancy Eastern parlor titled Evening at Home or some such. For a moment, he could almost believe they were just a normal family, with normal everyday concerns about gardens and prayers and mending. The illusion shattered with the sudden thunder of hoofbeats in the yard. Everyone froze as a voice called out urgently, "Mr. Boone! Mr. Boone!" Harold was on his feet in an instant, rifle already in hand as he stepped onto the porch. It was young Jim Tucker, one of his ranch hands, his horse lathered from hard riding. "What is it, Jim?" Harold demanded, noting the boy's wide eyes and pale face. "Pete spotted Ezra's men, sir," Jim reported breathlessly. "Down by the boundary fence near the creek. 6 of them, all armed. They're acting mighty suspicious, riding slow and studying the land like they're planning something." The household gathered in the kitchen, faces tense in the lamplight. Tommy clutched Sarah's hand while Rosa stood very still, one hand pressed against her throat. The dog whined softly, picking up on their anxiety. "What do you reckon they're up to?" Big John asked from his place by the door, his own rifle ready. Harold's face was grim as he checked his ammunition. "Nothing good, that's certain. Ezra's not the type to accept defeat gracefully." He turned to Rosa, his voice gentling. "The deed's still safe?" Rosa nodded, moving to lift a loose floorboard beneath the hutch. The precious document lay there, wrapped in oilcloth. She touched it briefly, her lips moving in silent prayer before replacing the board. "If Ezra means to strike," Harold said firmly, addressing them all, "he'll find me ready, but we need to be prepared." He turned to Big John. "Double the night watch. I want 2 men riding fence at all times." "Already done, boss," Big John assured. Pete and Manuel are out there now, and I'll take next shift myself." Harold nodded approval, then knelt before the children. "Tommy, Sarah, I need you both to be extra careful now. No wandering off, you hear? Stay close to the house where Rosa or one of us can see you." They nodded solemnly, understanding the seriousness of the situation despite their young ages. Sarah's lower lip trembled slightly, but she held her chin high. "Dios nos protege," Rosa whispered, making the sign of the cross. "God protect us." Harold reached out and squeezed her hand briefly, his calloused fingers warm against her smaller ones. "He will," he assured her quietly, "but he gave us sense enough to stand watch too." The household slowly dispersed to their rooms, though sleep would prove elusive for most. Harold took first watch on the porch, his rifle across his knees. The night stretched dark and vast around the cabin, filled with ordinary sounds that suddenly seemed ominous. The rustle of wind in trees, the distant yip of coyotes, the creak of the old windmill. Rosa stood at her window for a long time, watching Harold's steady figure silhouetted against the stars. The peace of their evening felt like a dream now, yet somehow the memory made her stronger rather than sadder. It was a glimpse of what could be, what they were fighting to protect. She knelt beside her bed, adding fresh prayers to those already whispered over the deed. Prayers for protection, for wisdom, for courage. Prayers in Spanish and Apache and English, lifting like smoke from different fires toward the same sky, outside. Harold kept his vigil, ready to defend all they held dear. The night grew deeper around the cabin, holding both threat and promise in its vast dark arms. 2 days passed in tense watchfulness. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear as Harold led Rosa and the children to check on a distant herd. Tommy rode proudly on his pony, while Sarah shared Rosa's horse. The familiar rhythm of hoofbeats on packed earth brought a deceptive sense of normalcy. Harold's eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert for trouble. His Winchester rifle rested securely in its saddle scabbard, close at hand. The cattle were grazing peacefully in the high meadow, fat and content on the late-season grass. "Looking good for winter," Harold remarked, making notes in his small leather notebook. "We should be able to—" He stopped mid-sentence, his weathered face going still. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose from the trail leading back to the ranch. Harold's jaw tightened as he counted the riders through his field glasses. "Rosa," he said quietly, "keep the children close." She nodded, gathering Sarah and Tommy near as the riders approached. The thunder of hooves grew louder, and soon they could make out 8 mounted men spreading across the trail. The sun glinted off gunmetal as Ezra's men took position, effectively blocking their path home. Harold shifted his horse slightly, putting himself between his family and the threat. His hand rested near his rifle, but he knew drawing first would only make things worse. "Afternoon," he called out evenly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Something we can help you with?" Instead of answering, one of Ezra's men fired his pistol into the air. The sharp crack echoed off the hills, spooking the horses. Sarah screamed as more riders emerged from the brush on either side, closing the trap. "Harold!" Rosa cried out in warning as 2 men charged toward them. Harold yanked his rifle free, but before he could aim, a rider slammed into him from behind. He fought to stay mounted, firing once into the air, hoping the sound might bring his ranch. Hands running, but rough hands seized his legs, dragging him from the saddle. Harold hit the ground hard, still gripping his rifle. He rolled and swung the weapon like a club, catching one attacker in the knee. But then pain exploded in his skull as someone brought a rifle butt down on his head. His vision blurred, the world tilting sideways as he sprawled in the dust. Through the haze of pain, he heard Rosa's terrified screams. He tried to push himself up, only to receive a vicious kick to his ribs that drove the air from his lungs. Boots and fists rained down as multiple men joined in the beating. "No, please." Rosa's voice cracked with desperation. "Harold!" He caught glimpses through swollen eyes. Rosa struggling as 2 men dragged her from her horse, her shawl torn away, dark hair coming loose from its pins. The children's horses wheeled and bolted for home, carrying Sarah and Tommy to safety. Blood ran into Harold's eyes as familiar bootsteps approached. He looked up to see Ezra Haskins standing over him, elegant in his tailored suit, twirling his silver-handled walking stick. "I warned you, Boone," Ezra said, his refined voice dripping with satisfaction. "Should have minded your own business and let the Mexican woman go when you had the chance." Harold tried to speak, but could only cough blood onto the dusty ground. He watched helplessly as Rosa was thrown roughly across a saddle, her wrists bound. Ezra knelt beside him, almost intimate in his cruelty. "You'll never see her again. By the time you drag yourself home, we'll be long gone. And if you're thinking of following—" He pressed the tip of his walking stick into Harold's broken ribs, drawing a grunt of pain. "Well, accidents happen all the time out here on the frontier." Harold could only watch through dimming vision as the riders mounted up. Rosa's cries grew fainter as they galloped away, leaving him broken in the road. The sun beat down mercilessly as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Finally, raw determination forced him to move. Every breath was agony as he crawled to his knees. His horse had run off with the others, leaving him to stagger homeward on foot. The 3-mile journey became a nightmare of pain and guilt. Each step sent fire through his ribs. Blood matted his hair and shirt. But Rosa's face kept him moving, her terror, her reaching hands, her fading cries. The sun was setting by the time he finally stumbled into the ranch yard. Big John and the other hands rushed to help him, their faces grim at his condition. In the kitchen, Sarah and Tommy huddled together, faces tear-streaked as they told of the ambush. "They took Rosa," Tommy sobbed. "We couldn't help her. We just ran like cowards." Harold gathered them close, ignoring his own pain. No, children, you did right. You got help, just like I taught you. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. You're safe. That's what matters. Later that night, after the doctor had wrapped his ribs and stitched his head, Harold sat alone by lamplight in the kitchen. His body throbbed with every heartbeat. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in his soul. The children had finally cried themselves to sleep upstairs. Their small faces haunted him, the shock, the guilt, the fear that their world had shattered again just when they'd found happiness. Harold bowed his head, his bandaged hands clasped tight. Lord, he whispered into the darkness, help me find her. Give me strength. Don't let me fail her now. Tears mixed with dried blood on his cheeks as he prayed. Rosa's screams echoed in his memory. Somewhere out there, she was alone and afraid, paying the price for trusting him with her safety. The thought was almost more than he could bear. The lamp flickered low as Harold kept his vigil, his desperate prayers rising like smoke in the night. Outside, an owl called mournfully, while inside, the clock ticked away precious seconds. Each moment carried Rosa further from home, deeper into whatever cruel fate Ezra had planned. The grandfather clock in Harold's kitchen ticked away the endless afternoon hours. Pain throbbed through his bandaged ribs with each breath as he sat at the worn oak table, staring unseeing at the cup of cold coffee before him. Tommy and Sarah huddled close on either side, their small hands clutching his arms as if afraid he might vanish too. The doctor had insisted he rest, but Harold couldn't bear lying in bed while Rosa remained in Ezra's clutches. Fresh guilt stabbed through him sharper than his physical wounds. He'd promised to protect her, and now, Sarah's quiet voice broke the heavy silence. Will they hurt Auntie Rosa? Harold's throat tightened. Before he could find words, rapid hoofbeats approached the house. Tommy scrambled to peek through the window curtains. It's Reverend Samuel, the boy announced. The young preacher's boots thumped on the porch, followed by a firm knock. Big John, Harold's foreman, opened the door. Samuel stepped inside, removing his hat. His usually gentle face was set in grim lines as he took in Harold's battered condition. I came as soon as I heard, Samuel said. He pulled up a chair, sitting across from Harold. The whole town's talking about what happened. Harold's bandaged fingers tightened around his coffee cup. Then they know Ezra's true nature now. Some do, Samuel leaned forward earnestly. But that's not why I'm here. Harold, you can't give up hope. The Lord hasn't abandoned Rosa or you. I failed her, Harold said, his voice rough. Just like I failed to save my men in the war. Memories rose unbidden. Screams, gunsmoke, young faces frozen in death. He'd sworn never to let violence touch his life again. Yet here he was, powerless once more while evil men hurt the innocent. You saved her once, Samuel insisted. You can again. Your courage gave her months of safety she wouldn't have had otherwise. Harold shook his head. I'm not the man I was. These ribs, I can barely stand, let alone fight. You won't have to fight alone. The words came from the doorway. Two tall Apache men stood there, straight-backed and dignified in their mixture of traditional and Western clothes. Harold recognized them. Rosa's late husband's brothers, who occasionally traded at the general store. I am Joseph, the elder said in careful English. This is my brother Michael. We heard what the cattle baron did. Harold started to rise, wincing at the pain. Joseph motioned him to stay seated as the brothers approached the table. Rosa is family, Michael said. When our brother married her, she became our sister. His death did not end that bond. We have tracked Haskins' men, Joseph continued. They took her to his ranch house, 20 miles north. There are guards, but we know the land. We can help you reach her. Hope flickered in Harold's chest for the first time since the attack. He studied their steady gazes, seeing the same determination. He felt, I'd be honored to ride with you, he said. But why help me? I'm just another white man. You defended our sister when others would not, Joseph replied simply. You opened your home to her, made her children laugh again. These things matter more than the color of skin. Michael nodded. Our brother would want us to help the man who protected his widow. We will honor his memory together. Harold clasped their offered hands firmly. The contact seemed to lend him strength, pushing back the fog of pain and doubt. "We'll need to move. Fast," he said, his tactical mind engaging. "Ezra won't keep her at his ranch long once he realizes help might come." Samuel cleared his throat. "I can help too. Not with the fighting, that's not my calling. But I can rally good people in town. Many are tired of Ezra's bullying. They just needed someone to stand up first." "Like you did, Uncle Harold," Tommy piped up. The boy's face was fierce with loyalty. Sarah nodded. "You taught us to help people even when it's scary." Harold felt tears prick his eyes. He gathered the children close, their faith in him a balm to his wounded spirit. "We'll leave before dawn," Joseph said. "The guards will be tired then. Michael and I will scout ahead tonight." Samuel stood. "I'll speak to people I trust." "Will. Make sure Ezra can't just ride away from this evil deed." "The children can stay with my wife," Big John offered from his post by the door. "Should keep them safe while we're gone." Plans crystallized as lamplight replaced the fading sun. Maps were studied, supplies gathered. The Apache brothers shared their knowledge of the terrain around Ezra's ranch. Marking hidden approaches. As full dark settled, Samuel gathered them all for prayer. The children knelt beside Harold's chair, their young voices joining the preacher's. Steady tones asking for protection and justice. After the others left to prepare, Harold forced himself to his feet. Every movement sent daggers through his ribs, but he made himself walk to his room. The familiar weight of his gun belt settled around his hips as he buckled it on. The Colt revolver had been cleaned and loaded by Big John while Harold was unconscious. Caught his reflection in the window glass, bandaged head, bruised face, but eyes burning with purpose. The scared, doubting man of that afternoon was gone. In his place stood a warrior ready to fight for what mattered. "Tomorrow," he whispered, checking his gun one final time, "we end this." Outside, an owl called, not mournful now, but fierce. And free. Harold took it as a sign. Whatever dawn might bring, he would face it standing tall, supported by the strength of unexpected brotherhood and unshakable faith. The clock struck 9, each chime like a hammer blow of determination. In a few hours they would ride. And this time, Harold swore, Rosa would not face her fears alone. The pre-dawn air bit sharp and cold as Harold and his small band of rescuers guided their horses through the darkness. Steam puffed from flaring nostrils as the mounts picked their way carefully along the trail. Joseph and Michael rode ahead, their forms barely visible in the deep blue shadows before sunrise. Behind Harold, Big John, and Pete, his most trusted ranch hands, followed silent as ghosts. Harold's ribs screamed with each movement of his horse, but he gritted his teeth against the pain. The rough bandages beneath his shirt had been re-wrapped tight, and Samuel's wife had pressed a small bottle of laudanum into his hand before they left. He'd refused it. He needed his mind clear for what was coming. Joseph raised his hand, signaling them to halt. Ahead, a cluster of cottonwoods rose, pale against the lightening sky. The branches whispered in the morning breeze, offering cover. "Haskins' ranch lies just beyond that rise," Joseph whispered as they dismounted. "We counted 6 men last night, 4 guards, plus Haskins and his foreman." Michael appeared from the shadows. They kept Rosa in the tool shed behind the main house. 2 men guard it. Others sleep inside. Harold nodded, checking his revolver one final time. "We wait until dusk. They'll be tired then, maybe drinking. Easier to surprise." The hours crawled by like years. They took turns watching through Joseph's spyglass as the ranch came to life. Horses were fed, cattle tended. Through the lens, Harold caught glimpses of Rosa being roughly marched to the outhouse and back, her head held high despite her bonds. His hands clenched until his knuckles went white. Finally, the sun began its slow descent. Long shadows stretched across the valley as cookfire smoke rose from the ranch house chimney. Through the spyglass, Harold watched Ezra's men gather on the porch, passing a bottle between them. Their loud laughter carried on the evening air. "Now," Harold breathed. They crept forward through the growing darkness, using every scrap of cover. Joseph and Michael moved like smoke, their moccasins silent on the hard earth. Even Big John and Pete, used to noisy ranch work, managed to stay quiet as they approached. The tool shed stood 20 yards behind the main house. A single lantern burned beside it, casting yellow light on 2 guards who lounged against the wall, sharing the dregs of a whiskey bottle. Harold's heart pounded as they drew closer. One wrong move, one snapped twig. Suddenly a guard's head snapped up. "Hey, who's—" The rest of his words vanished in chaos. Joseph and Michael struck like lightning, taking down both guards before they could shout. Fists thudded against flesh, knives flashed. One guard's gun went off with a deafening crack. "Raiders!" Someone yelled from the house. Boots thundered on the porch. Harold sprinted for the shed door, ignoring the fire in his ribs. The lock gave way to one savage blow from his rifle butt. He yanked the door open. Rosa huddled in the corner, hands bound behind her. Her face was dirty but unmarked. Their eyes met in the dim light. "Harold," she breathed. He dropped to his knees. Beside her, sawing through the ropes with his knife. "I'm here. You're safe now." Outside, the night erupted in gunfire. Someone screamed in pain. Rosa's arms came free. She collapsed against Harold's chest, trembling. "I knew you would come. I prayed you would come." "Always," he whispered fiercely. Then louder, "Can you run?" She nodded, gathering her skirts. Harold helped her up, keeping his body between her and the door. More shots rang out, closer now. Burst from the shed into chaos. Big John and Pete were exchanging fire with Ezra's men from behind water troughs. Joseph lay bleeding behind a wagon wheel. Michael crouched protectively over him. "Get to the horses!" Harold shouted. He fired twice, forcing Ezra's foreman to dive for cover. Rosa ran like a deer, Harold close behind her. His ribs screamed as they sprinted past the fighting. A bullet whined past his ear. "Stop them!" Ezra's voice boomed from the house. The cattle baron himself appeared on the porch, shotgun raised. Harold spun, pushing Rosa behind him. His revolver lined up with Ezra's chest as if drawn there by fate itself. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Harold saw the hatred in Ezra's eyes, the trembling trigger finger. It would be so easy. One squeeze and the man who had caused so much pain would trouble them no more. Harold's finger tightened. "Harold, please," Rosa whispered behind him. "Do not stain your soul with his blood." The moment stretched, balanced on a knife's edge. Then Harold's aim shifted slightly up and left. His shot took Ezra's hat clean off, making the man stumble backward. "You'll answer to the people for what you've done," Harold declared, voice carrying across the yard. "Your money won't save you this time." He backed away, keeping his gun trained on Ezra. "John, Pete, fall back." His ranch hands provided covering fire as they retreated. Michael helped Joseph to his feet, supporting his brother's weight. Blood darkened Joseph's sleeve, but he managed to walk. "This isn't over." Ezra shouted after them, face purple with rage. "I'll ruin you all. You hear me? You're dead men." They made it to the horses without further injury. Harold helped Rosa mount behind him, her arms wrapping tight around his waist. Pain lanced through his ribs at the pressure, but he welcomed it. She was safe. She was alive. They rode hard through the darkness, not slowing until Ezra's ranch was far behind them. The moon rose, painting the landscape in silver. Rosa's grip never loosened, her face pressed against Harold's back. He could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. Finally, when the horses needed rest, they reined in beside a small creek. Joseph's wound proved to be a deep graze, painful but not life-threatening. While Michael tended it, Rosa helped Harold ease down from his horse. His legs nearly buckled as the pain and fatigue caught up with him. "You came for me," Rosa said softly, supporting his weight. "Even injured, you came." Harold met her eyes in the moonlight. "I'll always come for you, no matter what." She touched his bruised face with gentle fingers. "I know. God help me, I know." They stood there a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Big John cleared his throat. "We should keep moving," he said. "Ezra might try to follow once he gets his nerve back." Harold nodded. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Still, as he helped Rosa back onto his horse, he felt hope rising like the moon above them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in streaks of pink and gold as Harold's battered group rode slowly into town. Rosa sat behind him, her arms wrapped gently around his bruised ribs. Joseph and Michael flanked them, with Big John and Pete bringing up the rear. The clip-clop of hooves on the hard-packed street drew faces to windows and doors. A woman gasped, dropping her basket of eggs. "Lord have mercy, look at them." Word spread like wildfire through the settlement. Townsfolk emerged from their homes and businesses, forming a growing crowd that followed Harold's group toward the church. Children pointed at Rosa's torn dress and the dark bruises on her wrists. Men muttered angrily at Harold's battered face. And the blood-stained bandage on Joseph's arm. Reverend Samuel Carter stood waiting in the churchyard, his young face grim but determined. The morning sun cast long shadows across the very spot where Rosa had faced the whip just days before. The memory hung heavy in the air as Harold helped Rosa dismount. "Brothers and sisters," Samuel's clear voice rang out, "God has brought us here today to witness truth." The crowd parted as thundering hooves approached. Ezra Haskins rode in with his remaining men, their horses lathered with sweat from a hard night's pursuit. Ezra's face was twisted with rage as he dismounted, stalking toward Harold and Rosa. "That woman's land belongs to me," he bellowed. "These thieves attacked my ranch. They're outlaws." But something had changed in the watching faces. Women who had once whispered against Rosa now stood closer, protective. Men who had feared Ezra's influence straightened their backs. Samuel's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This town must decide," he declared, raising his Bible high. "Do we follow fear or faith with mercy?" Ezra's hand dropped to his revolver. The sound of steel clearing leather rang sharp in the morning air. But as he raised the weapon, his eyes darted around the churchyard. Not one person moved to support him. Even his own men looked away, unwilling to draw against an entire town. Rosa stepped forward, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "I will not be broken," she said clearly. "Not by whips, not by kidnapping, not by threats. This land was my husband's dream, our dream. And these good people," she gestured to Harold and their allies, "risked their lives to defend what is right." Ezra's gun wavered. The weight of united stares pressed down on him like a physical force. Slowly, his arm lowered until the revolver pointed at the dirt. The tension broke like a fever. Someone started clapping, then another, until applause thundered. Through the churchyard, Ezra stumbled backward, his face ashen. The mighty cattle baron seemed to shrink as he retreated to his horse. His men following quietly. Harold reached for Rosa's hand, squeezing it gently. Pride shone in his eyes as he looked at her, this brave woman who had helped unite their divided town. She squeezed back, tears of relief and joy sparkling in her dark eyes as the morning sun blessed them all with its golden light. The ranch house glowed like a beacon in the deepening twilight. Wagons and buggies rolled into the yard one after another, carrying neighbors with covered dishes and humble hearts. The kitchen filled with warmth and delicious aromas as women laid out their offerings, golden-crusted apple pies, fresh-baked bread still warm from the oven, and thick slices of smoky ham. Rosa stood near the hearth, tears glinting in her eyes. As former accusers approached with gifts and quiet apologies, she accepted each offering with gracious dignity, her gentle smile touching even the most hardened hearts. Children who had once hidden from her now crowded close, asking for stories. In the corner by the window, Harold sat with Reverend Samuel, their heads bent in serious conversation. "The church board meets tomorrow," Samuel assured him. "Ezra's actions cannot go unchallenged. He'll face formal censure for what he's done." As evening deepened, guests began saying their goodbyes. The house settled into peaceful quiet, broken only by Rosa's soft humming as she rocked little Sarah in the old wooden chair. Harold paused in the doorway, watching them. His niece's eyes were heavy with sleep, her small hand curled trustingly in Rosa's shawl. The sight filled his heart near to bursting. Outside, the well bucket creaked rhythmically as John drew water for the night. The familiar sound reminded Harold of Rosa's spring, now safe and secured, like the woman herself. When the children were tucked in, Harold found Rosa on the porch, moonlight turning her dark hair to silver. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for standing strong, but for showing me something I'd forgotten." "What is that?" she asked. "That faith isn't just about surviving hard times. It's about hoping for better ones." His voice was rough with emotion as he gazed at her in the silvery light. Days passed like gentle rain washing away storm clouds. The terror of recent events faded as peace settled over the ranch once more. Ezra Haskins and his men withdrew from the territory, their influence broken by united townfolk standing against cruelty. Harold and Rosa found comfort working side by side, mending the damaged fences where Ezra's men had torn them down. The steady rhythm of hammering posts and stretching wire filled their days, punctuated by the children's laughter as they played nearby. Sarah and John had taken to bringing them water and sandwiches wrapped in cloth, making each workday feel like a family. Picnic. One crisp afternoon, Harold suggested they ride out to check Rosa's spring. The water sparkled like diamonds in the afternoon sun, crystal clear and sweet. Rosa dismounted first, touching the smooth stones reverently. Harold followed, his boots crunching on gravel as he knelt beside the flowing water. He cupped his hands, letting the cool spring water fill them. "This spring belongs with you, Rosa," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "But if you'll have me, I'd share it and all else with you." Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she looked at this strong, gentle man who had risked everything to protect her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes." Harold gathered her in his arms as the children burst from their hiding spot behind nearby bushes, whooping with joy. Their celebration echoed across the valley. That evening, over a supper of fresh bread and stew, Harold announced the betrothal to the household. Reverend Samuel arrived shortly after, his timing suspiciously perfect, bringing his warmest smile and pastoral blessing for their union. Rosa clasped Harold's weathered hand across the table, her eyes shining with joy. "Of ashes," she said softly, "God has made a home." Home. Sunday bells pealed across the valley, their familiar chime carrying hope instead of dread. Harold adjusted his freshly pressed collar as he waited by the wagon. Rosa emerged from the house wearing her best dress, a smile brightening her face. Little Sarah and John scrambled up beside her, their shoes shined and hair neatly combed. The family rode together into town, wagon wheels creaking along the familiar path. This time, no whispers followed them as they approached the white-painted church. Harold helped Rosa down, taking her hand proudly as they walked up the steps. The children skipped ahead, eager to join their friends in the front pews. Inside, sunlight streamed through glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across wooden benches. Reverend Samuel stood at the pulpit, his young face glowing with purpose. His sermon rang clear and true, speaking of mercy's power to heal broken hearts and justice's role in building God's kingdom. "Second chances," he proclaimed, "are the Lord's greatest gift to us all." After the final hymn, church members gathered around Rosa and Harold. Women who had once turned away now pressed fresh-baked bread into Rosa's hands. Men who had stood silent during her persecution now tipped their hats respectfully. Children clustered around her skirts, begging to hear stories of healing herbs and Apache wisdom. That evening, the ranch house glowed golden with lamplight and contentment. Rosa sat in her rocking chair. Little John curled sleepily in her lap while Harold spun tales of cattle drives and starlit nights on the range. Sarah leaned against his knee, eyes wide with wonder. Through the open window came the steady music of flowing water from the spring, life-giving streams feeding the land they shared. Harold paused his story as they bowed their heads together, giving thanks for deliverance from darkness into light. The lamp cast its gentle glow across their faces. Harold's weather-worn features softened with peace, Rosa's eyes bright with belonging, the children secure in the warmth of their found family. No longer did loneliness haunt these walls. Love had made them whole. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.